know that you're this billionaire investor and you're a very successful businessman, but you have a deep fascination with UFOs.
Yeah. Yeah, sure do.
How did this all get started?
Back when when I was about 3 years old, which would be about 1947, and actually of May of that year, my grandparents had a very close encounter that was dramatic. And they were taking an evening drive in the late afternoon up into the mountains and coming on back down to Las Vegas. And they saw what appeared to be at first an airplane on fire. And the object became closer and closer to them, and they pulled off to the side of the road. And at one point, then it filled up the windshield, and they thought they were going to die. And at the last second, it shot off and disappeared. And I learned of this story when I was probably 10 years old, and because I was 3 at the time, and my mother had told me this story. So I approached my grandfather, and he wouldn't talk about it. Now, after all these years, like 7 years have gone by, because I was intrigued with it. And so I went to my grandmother, and she only would say a few words, but she wouldn't talk. So I got the story from my mom, and my grandfather had to sit on the side of the road there in the car for a while to recompose himself, and because they thought they were going to die, and then he finally was able to drive on back to Las Vegas. So that was the beginning for me.
Did he ever describe what you said? It looked like a plane on fire, but like, what was the shape of it as it got closer?
I don't recall any kind of shape that my mother described. I don't recall that.
But they just knew it wasn't a plane. They knew it was something.
That's right.
Something crazy.
So in the family, the family had an event, and I lived right next door to my grandparents, and the family had an event that kind of started things at that date. For me, other personal things came later, but for the family, that was a big deal.
So this was, you said 47?
47.
And 47 was the time of the Roswell crash. 47 was a time there was a lot of UFO activity being observed worldwide. And the speculation is that this had to do with the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all the tests that the United States had done and Russia had done, and that there was a lot of interest in that. Well, actually, Russia hadn't dropped any bombs by that time, right?
Right.
It was after that. But that there was interest in our species by extraterrestrials because they're like, oh, these crazy assholes are detonating nukes. Like, let's go take a look at them.
Right. Well, you had so-called Foo Fighters during the war, these lights that were following bombers, and the tail gunners were the ones that saw them most often, of course, and that happened through the war, and then of course Roswell. But before that was Ken Arnold, right? In about June-ish, and then in July 8th was Roswell.
And there's a direct uptick though from the Trinity experiments, right?
I think I gather my feeling simply is that without any kind of other evidence or proof that was a huge stimulus. Yeah.
So this was around that time, and you had heard about this as a part of, family discussions.
Right.
And so that sort of ignited the fire initially.
Yeah. And I started asking my friends, as I say, when I was about 10, have you any reports in your family of anything? And by golly, a couple of my close friends told me things that they had never told me before. So, that wasn't necessarily an exclusive event, is what I'm saying. Other people in Las Vegas had seen things at close proximity as well.
Now, your relationship to this is obviously something that you've carried for so long. It's been an obsession of yours for so long.
Yeah. Yeah.
It started with this, but what personal experiences, if any, have you had?
Well, when I was probably 7 or so, 7 or 8, I used to have what I chalked up all my life to just being silly dreams. And I had maybe 5 or 6 of these dreams, and I could never make sense of them. And I would be laying in bed on my side, and typical dream, always the same. There would be 3 short somethings in a kind of monk robe, and so I couldn't see any face, couldn't see any appendages. And these 3 whatevers were standing there, and they were not too far from my eye level as far as the heights and so forth.
So these like child size?
Yeah. And so there was nothing I was an avid comic book reader, but there was nothing in the whole genre of comic books that related to that, or movies. And we didn't have television in Las Vegas till 53 or 54. And even after that, it was terrible broadcasting, at first. But so it made no sense to me. And so over my lifetime, I never mentioned it to anybody, including my wife. It's funny how you keep things secret, and just kind of for no good reason. Maybe I would be embarrassed to talk about it. But I finally thought, well, maybe it was just dreams. Maybe it was something else. And so that was a first event personally that I had at that time in the subject.
When did you start to connect the idea of these tiny people or human-like things with extraterrestrials?
Well, years later, when I began to start my process as a researcher and as a student in the subject, and began to talk with people who made it their business to be experts in abductions, and the more I got into the field and sat writing out questions for the researcher, for the therapist who would be asking the questions, and I'd be sitting there watching the process. And just over time, I thought, well, maybe there was something more to it, but I'm better off not knowing anything, so I'll just block it off and forget about it.
Yeah, we talked last night about John Mack a little bit, the Harvard.
A great guy.
Yeah. And he did a lot of these sort of hypnotic regression sessions with people where they describe very similar scenarios.
A multitude of different situations. The abduction phenomena was very proliferate in the population, it seemed like. Even we did a survey called the Roper Poll,